This video is a supporting guide for the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection in partnership with the UMass Lead in School Drinking Water Extended Assistance Program. This video will highlight what you need to know when taking water samples for lead testing. Planning your sampling. Prior to sampling, make sure to check over your sampling plan and chain of custody. This may be done with your technical assistance provider or on your own before sampling. Familiarize yourself with where your sampling plan begins and the outlets that will be tested to avoid confusion later. When you begin sampling, you will need the 250 milliliter sample bottles that were provided, a clipboard or hard surface to write on, a pen, a watch or timer, a black permanent marker, and the chain of custody and labels provided by your technical assistance provider. Chain of custody. When sampling, you will be filling out the chain of custody to track the samples you are collecting. The chain of custody is a legal document that tracks samples from collection through the results to ensure the integrity of the sample and data. The printed copy that is filled out during your sampling will go with your samples to the lab. For the chain of custody, there are only a few areas that you are responsible for completing. First, before sampling, you will need to write your name and initials as the sampler in this box at the top of the document. Then, during sampling, the area on the document with the columns flush time, collection date and time, and sampler's initials is where you will be recording information about your samples. When you are sent the chain of custody, the technical assistance provider will have already filled out the location codes, types, and location names for where you will be sampling. You will just be filling out the other 3 columns as you collect samples. After you have finished sampling, you will need to complete a few more items on the chain of custody. First, in the page number section in the top right, number the pages of the chain of custody so the lab is aware of the order of pages. Then, in the box here, you will need to relinquish the chain of custody by signing it and recording the date and time for the lab. Underneath that box, print your name and your signature, as well as the date under sampler certification. Note that if there is a pre-populated location that is not sampled, please cross out that location on the chain of custody. Labels. You will also be filling out labels while you are collecting samples. This is what your label should look like. Make sure every label is filled in correctly and matches the chain of custody. The label should already have your school's name, organization code, and location codes printed on it. The information that you should include on the labels as you sample is the date and time when collecting samples. Circle whether the sample for that label is a primary or flush sample, and include the sampler's name. If you don't have labels, you can use a permanent marker and write all of the information directly on the sample bottle. When to sample. Taps should be sampled after being inactive for at least 8 hours. Sampling in the morning is a great way to do this. However, taps cannot be inactive for over 18 hours. Because of this, avoid sampling on weekends, holidays, or vacations. We do not sample taps if they have been inactive for this long, as the water will be stagnant for too long. Where to sample. These locations that will be sampled are provided on your chain of custody. These locations will be provided with a location code and location name for reference. These locations will include sinks, bubblers, and other outlets that provide water. How to sample. Sampling will require 2 types of samples: the primary sample, also called the first draw sample, and the flush sample. The primary sample will be the first sample for each location. This will be to test the first sample of water from the faucet. The flush sample is the second sample from each faucet. This sample is taken after leaving the water of the faucet on for 30 seconds, flushing it, and then taking the sample. The sample should be about 250 milliliters of water, which is marked on the sampling bottles provided with a small tick at the top of the bottle. You only need to fill the bottle to that line. It does not have to be completely filled. Avoid touching the inside of the sampling bottle or inside the cap of the bottle when collecting samples. This can contaminate the sample and affect the results from testing. When sampling, you should collect all of the water flowing from the sink during the sample. Do your best to line up the bottle as precisely as possible to not miss any drops of water when collecting the sample. Sampling should be done using cold water. Before sampling, make sure the faucet is adjusted to the cold side and not hot. Water should also be sampled from a slow, continuous flow of water. Unless the sample is being taken from a motion-activated sink where the flow cannot be changed, the flow should be slow and not a heavy stream of water. The flow should be continuous, meaning that you should only turn on the faucet and take the sample, not moving the faucet handle to different flow levels. This includes when you are taking a flushed sample. For flushed samples, we recommend that you open the bottle for the flush sample either before you begin the flush or during the flush. This way, you can pick up the sampling bottle when the water has been flushed for 30 seconds and take the sample immediately without turning the faucet on and off. You should be filling out the chain of custody and your labels as you are sampling. Labeling bottles after you've finished each sample can prevent confusion later on to which bottle is which. For our example, we have labeled the bottles with a P and F to avoid confusing which bottle is which. You could use a similar method to this if it is helpful. Most likely, your sampling plan will include a few different types of outlets to collect from, including water fountains and motion-activated sinks. You may feel confused on how to sample these outlets without spilling water or making mistakes. We have provided here a few examples and tips on how to best sample these outlets. Water fountain sampling. Water fountains can be awkward to sample if you have never sampled these locations before. When sampling, you should keep the bottle close to the spout of the fountain and press on the button for the fountain slowly to catch all of the water. As needed, adjust the position of the bottle under the spout or adjust the pressure placed on the control for the water fountain. Sampling motion-activated sinks. When sampling a motion-activated sink, make sure the sink is set to releasing cold water before sampling. There may be a small switch on the faucet or under the sink to do so. Hold your hand against the sensor to keep a continuous flow of water for the samples and the flush of 30 seconds. Here is an example of how the sampling process should be for one sampling location. First, I have located the sampling location on my chain of custody. Then, I begin to fill out the chain of custody. Since my first sample will be the primary sample, this must be location 001P, the kitchen faucet. The flush time is recorded as 0 seconds, since a primary draw does not have a flush before sampling. I record the date for this sample and the time, and initial the document under sampler's initials. Then, I begin drawing the primary sample, making sure the bottle is already under the faucet and pre-positioned to catch all of the water that leaves the faucet. Making sure that the faucet is uncooled, I pull the faucet handle for a continuous flow and collect the sample, filling it to 250 milliliters. Then, I cap the sample and set up my timer for the flush draw. I fill out the chain of custody for my flush sample, fill out the correct row for the sample, location 001F, the flush time, which is 30 seconds, and then the date, time, and my initials. If you run into a problem trying to fit both the date and time in this small column, you can write the date in the empty box above the column. After I've filled out the chain of custody for this sample, I begin the 30-second flush. During the flush, I open the bottle and set it close to the sink so I can collect the sample immediately after the timer stops. The timer rings as it hits 30 seconds. I quickly sample from the continuous stream of the faucet. Only after I have completed collecting the sample do I turn off the faucet or the timer. Finally, I fill out the labels. These labels will be filled out with the exact information from the chain of custody, and then they are placed on the correct bottles. This process should be similar for all of the sampling locations. Shipping. After you've completed the sampling, labeled all of the bottles, and completed the chain of custody, you will need to prepare the bottles for pickup or shipment. If you were provided with sampling bottles in a cooler or storage container, place the filled sample bottles back into this container with the proper labels and chain of custody for pickup. Have these samples ready for pickup by the lab at the correct place and time that was previously determined. Samples are not refrigerated and do not have a required treatment before picking up. However, they are only viable for 28 days. If the samples are being shipped, package them in the given container or a box with the correct shipping information. Ship the samples out as soon as you can. If you have any questions or concerns, contact your technical assistance provider